October 14th, 2025, exactly 4:17 a.m. Russian forces were advancing through the industrial sector of Bakhmut when suddenly their lead T-72 tank erupted in flames. The crew barely had time to scream before a second explosion tore through the armored column. What they didn't know was that Ukrainian forces had been waiting in the ruins for 3 hours, armed with newly delivered anti-tank weapons and a desperate plan. But this wasn't just another skirmish in the endless grind of trench warfare. This was the moment Russia would deploy its most feared urban warfare machine for the first time in actual combat. The BMPT Terminator was about to change everything. The morning mist hung thick over the devastated streets as Russian commanders received urgent reports from their forward positions. Ukrainian resistance was stronger than expected, and conventional armor was getting picked apart by hidden AT teams operating from the skeletal remains of apartment buildings. Tank after tank was falling to javelin strikes and RPG ambushes. The 3rd Motor Rifle Regiment had already lost 6 T-80s in 2 hours, and their advance had ground to a complete halt. In the command bunker 15 kilometers behind the lines, Colonel Mikhail Petrov was facing the biggest decision of his military career. The BMPT Terminator had been designed specifically for this nightmare scenario. Urban warfare where every window could hide a sniper, every basement could conceal an anti-tank team, and every street corner could become a killing field. Unlike traditional tanks that were built to fight other tanks on open battlefields, the Terminator was engineered to support infantry in the most hostile environments imaginable. Its dual 30mm autocannons could shred through concrete walls and eliminate threats that heavy tank guns simply couldn't engage effectively. 4 Ataka missile launchers provided precision strikes against hardened positions, while twin AGS-17 grenade launchers could saturate entire building floors with explosive fire. But theory and practice were two completely different things, and no amount of training could prepare crews for what they were about to face in the urban hell of Bakhmut. At 0430 hours, the first BMPT Terminator rolled off its transport trailer and immediately drew the attention of every Russian soldier in the staging area. The vehicle looked like something from a science fiction movie with its angular armor plating, multiple weapon systems, and distinctive twin gun turrets. The crew of 3 had trained for months on this machine, but Senior Sergeant Viktor Kozlov still felt his hands trembling as he climbed into the gunner's position. His commander, Lieutenant Alexei Volkov, had fought in Syria and Chechnya, but even he admitted this would be different. The plan was straightforward on paper. The Terminator would advance with a reinforced infantry company, providing close fire support while the soldiers cleared buildings room by room. The BMPT's sensors and thermal imaging would identify threats that infantry couldn't see, while its weapons would eliminate resistance points that were too dangerous for foot soldiers to approach. The Terminator's armor could withstand most RPG hits, and its active protection system could intercept incoming missiles. It was supposed to be the perfect urban warfare machine, but the Ukrainians had been studying Russian tactics for months, and they had prepared a reception that would test every system on the Terminator to its absolute limits. As the BMPT entered the outskirts of the industrial district, Kozlov's thermal sight immediately picked up multiple heat signatures in the surrounding buildings. Some were clearly human shapes moving between floors, while others appeared to be equipment or weapon systems. The computer automatically classified targets and assigned threat priorities. But Kozlov knew that in urban combat, the biggest dangers often came from the places you weren't looking. The first contact came from a 3rd-floor window at exactly 0447. A Ukrainian soldier fired an RPG-7 at close range, and the Terminator's Stora active protection system immediately responded. Infrared jammers disrupted the missile's guidance, while smoke grenades created an instant concealment cloud. The RPG struck the front armor at an oblique angle and deflected harmlessly into the rubble-strewn street. Kozlov swiveled his 30mm cannon toward the window and unleashed a 3-second burst that turned the entire corner of the building into flying debris. But that first shot had been a signal, and suddenly the entire street erupted in gunfire. Muzzle flashes appeared from windows, doorways, and rooftop positions as Ukrainian defenders opened up with everything they had. AK-74 rounds sparked off the Terminator's armor, while machine gun fire from a PKM position tried to find weak spots in the vehicle's protection. Kozlov worked his controls frantically, engaging target after target with the twin autocannons, while Lieutenant Volkov coordinated with the supporting infantry over the radio. The 30mm high-explosive rounds were devastating against personnel in light cover, but the Ukrainians had chosen their positions well. The real test came when Kozlov's threat warning system detected an incoming missile signature from the north. A Ukrainian ATGM team had managed to get a Stugna P anti-tank missile in the air, and it was tracking directly toward the BMPT's center mass. The Stora system engaged automatically, but this time the Ukrainian gunner had anticipated the countermeasures. The missile stayed on course, and Lieutenant Volkov had exactly 2 seconds to make a decision that would determine whether his crew lived or died. Volkov threw the Terminator into reverse while simultaneously ordering Kozlov to engage the missile team's position with an Ataka. The BMPT's own missiles streaked toward the building where the Ukrainian team was located just as their Stugna P struck the vehicle's frontal armor. The explosion was tremendous, and for a moment, smoke and flame completely obscured the Terminator from view. Russian infantry soldiers watching from nearby positions were certain the BMPT had been destroyed. But when the smoke cleared, the Terminator was still moving. The frontal armor had held, though barely, and Kozlov was already engaging new targets with methodical precision. The Ukrainian ATGM team's position had been obliterated by the Ataka missile, taking out an entire floor of the apartment building they had been using as cover. The psychological impact on the defending forces was immediate and profound. Their most powerful anti-tank weapon had failed to stop this new Russian machine. However, the Ukrainians were far from finished. As the BMPT advanced deeper into the urban maze, Ukrainian infantry began using tactics that no training manual had prepared the Russian crew for. Small teams armed with RPGs and improvised explosive devices began moving through the underground tunnel systems that connected the industrial buildings. They would emerge from manholes and basement entrances, fire at close range, and disappear back into the underground before the Terminator could respond effectively. The fighting became intensely personal, as Ukrainian soldiers got close enough to bang on the BMPT's armor with rifle butts and throw Molotov cocktails at the vehicle's vision blocks. Kozlov found himself engaging targets at ranges of less than 10 meters, using his autocannons to blast through walls and floors where he suspected enemy soldiers were hiding. The sound inside the Terminator was deafening as rounds struck the armor and the vehicle's own weapons fired continuously. During one particularly intense engagement, a Ukrainian soldier managed to climb onto the BMPT's rear deck while the crew was focused on threats to their front. The soldier had a magnetic mine and was attempting to attach it to the engine compartment when the vehicle's commander noticed movement on his rear-facing camera. What followed was a desperate struggle as Lieutenant Volkov tried to shake off the attacker by reversing into a concrete wall while Kozlov attempted to depress his weapons low enough to engage the threat. The mine exploded just as the Ukrainian soldier jumped clear, but the Terminator's armor held once again. However, the blast had damaged several external systems and the crew could smell smoke beginning to seep into the fighting compartment. They were still operational but barely, and there were at least 6 more blocks of urban terrain to clear before they could claim their objective. The damage assessment revealed the full scope of what the BMPT crew was facing. The magnetic mine had severed 2 hydraulic lines and knocked out the rear-facing thermal camera, leaving them partially blind to attacks from behind. Worse yet, the explosion had alerted every Ukrainian position within a 3-block radius to their exact location. Lieutenant Volkov knew they had walked into a carefully orchestrated trap, but retreat was no longer an option. The supporting infantry was pinned down by sniper fire, and the Terminator was the only thing keeping them from being completely overrun. At 05:12 hours, the situation deteriorated rapidly when Ukrainian forces began their most audacious assault yet. A squad of engineers had spent the previous night rigging explosive charges in the basement of a 5-story apartment building directly in the Terminator's path. As the BMPT approached the intersection, Kozlov's remaining sensors detected unusual electromagnetic signatures emanating from below ground level. Before he could warn his commander, the entire building collapsed in a controlled demolition that sent tons of concrete and twisted metal crashing down onto the street. The Terminator disappeared completely under an avalanche of debris, and for nearly 2 minutes there was absolute silence on the Russian radio networks. Ukrainian soldiers emerged from their hiding positions believing they had finally stopped the feared machine. But they had underestimated both the BMPT's structural integrity and the determination of its crew. Deep beneath the rubble, Lieutenant Volkov was fighting to maintain consciousness while hydraulic fluid leaked from ruptured lines and electrical systems sparked dangerously around them. Kozlov's left arm was broken, but his right hand still worked the firing controls as he systematically engaged the infrared signatures moving through the debris field above them. The 30mm rounds punched through concrete slabs and rebar like they were paper, sending Ukrainian soldiers scrambling for new cover. The sound of the autocannons firing from beneath tons of rubble created an otherworldly echo that reverberated through the entire district. Russian infantry soldiers, hearing their mechanical guardian fighting from its concrete tomb, rallied and began pushing forward with renewed ferocity. The breakthrough came when Kozlov managed to fire an Ataka missile straight up through the debris pile, creating a shaft that allowed the BMPT's engine to breathe again. With grinding mechanical determination, the Terminator began clawing its way out of the collapsed building like some prehistoric monster emerging from its lair. Chunks of concrete rolled off its armor plating as the vehicle's tracks gained purchase on the rubble beneath. Ukrainian defenders watched in horror as the BMPT's twin gun turrets emerged from the wreckage, immediately swiveling to engage new targets. The psychological impact was devastating. Here was a machine that had survived a building collapse and was still fighting. Several Ukrainian soldiers simply abandoned their positions and fled deeper into the urban maze, but others held firm with the desperate courage of men defending their homeland. The close-quarters battle that followed pushed both the machine and its crew beyond all design specifications. Ukrainian infantry got close enough to attack the BMPT with crowbars and sledgehammers, trying to jam the turret mechanisms or disable the vision blocks. Kozlov found himself firing his weapons at targets he could physically touch through his periscopes. The muzzle flashes from his autocannons illuminated Ukrainian faces twisted with determination and fear as they pressed their attack against impossible odds. In one terrifying moment, a Ukrainian soldier managed to climb directly onto the gun turret while Kozlov was reloading. The enemy fighter began striking the gunner's sight with a combat knife, trying to blind the BMPT's primary sensor. Lieutenant Volkov made a split-second decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He activated the turret's emergency rotation function at maximum speed, spinning the entire weapon system like a deadly carousel. The Ukrainian soldier was thrown clear but struck a concrete wall with lethal force. The fighting reached its climax when Ukrainian forces attempted their final gambit. A team of combat engineers had positioned themselves in the basement of the next building with enough explosives to level an entire city block. Their plan was simple but suicidal. They would wait until the Terminator was directly overhead, then detonate everything at once. Even if the BMPT survived, the explosion would be large enough to bring down every structure in a 200-meter radius, hopefully trapping the vehicle permanently. But the engineers never got their chance. As the BMPT approached their position, Kozlov's damaged thermal sensors detected the massive heat signature from the explosive stockpile below. With his last functional Ataka missile, he punched through the basement floor and detonated the charges prematurely. The explosion was apocalyptic, but it occurred 50 meters away from the Terminator instead of directly beneath it. When the dust settled hours later, the BMPT Terminator sat motionless in a crater surrounded by the flattened remains of an entire city block. Its crew had survived the ultimate test of urban warfare, proving that even in the most desperate close-quarters combat, superior technology and unwavering determination could overcome seemingly impossible odds. The age of the Terminator had truly begun.